Elden Ring lets you travel to a magical realm where you can experience all the wondrous delights of being a mystical warrior. Sheep bothering, dodge rolling, shopping,
Still going to purchase something?
boob snuggles. Oh, she smells nice. My Little Pony. Failure. Lots and lots of failure. Cheesing. Who's laughing now? Picking berries. Weirdos.
If you see the little chrysalids in Stormvale Castle, tell them I love them.
Nah, you're alright, mate. Hyperinflation. The world's most depressing clubhouse.
I took you for dead. No matter, it's all the same.
Charming. Pingu. Collecting sheep shit. This looks like a party I went to once. Welcome to Elden Ring on PC. It's a PC game, but someone forgot to tell the developers. Spoiler warning. This video contains spoilers, despite me barely killing any bosses, because the game is too hard and I cried like a girl. Trigger warning. This is my first Souls game. Anyone familiar with this genre will find much of my game footage extremely traumatising. I ride around on My Little Pony, collecting sheep shit, completely unaware how to use half of my skills and abilities, whilst being blissfully ignorant that the other half of my skills actually exist. I have learned from experience that there is a phenomenon in the video game world, and it goes something like this. A video game comes out. It is a sequel or spiritual successor of an existing franchise. This franchise or genre has a die-hard fanatical hardcore following. These long-term fans see the franchise as their property, their domain, their personal kingdom, and don't take too kindly to people wandering onto their land and bothering the sheep, even though they don't actually own the land. They just happen to be standing on it. If you are someone that pees himself and has temper tantrums, or becomes all snooty and holier than thou when anyone criticises your favourite games, then frankly, and with the most absolute respect, it's probably best that you go and buy yourself a fresh nappy and watch some Elden Ring build videos instead. I like Elden Ring, I will say that up front, but on PC at least, my experiences were far from perfect. So I will be talking about the good and the bad, and if hearing opinions different from your own is problematic, then frankly, you're probably going to find this channel problematic as well. Not that the warnings make any difference. Fanboys just watch the first 3 or 4 minutes of the video, get triggered and start spamming angry comments regardless. But I tried. I guess you can lead a donkey to water, but you can't make it stop being a fucking ass. Whilst the angry people are typing, I should also qualify that I am acutely aware that there are people out there who have played and mastered this and all previous Souls games. They know vastly more about the genre and this game than I do, therefore I appreciate that I'm wading in with my size 12s and late to the party, then gushing forth non-expert opinion about a topic that I'm entirely unqualified to discuss. I would, however, defend this position based on a few key points. 1. I promise to review this game. 2. I'm always running my mouth off about shit I don't understand, and Elden Ring is not so precious that it's going to dodge that bullet. 3. I think a new guy's perspective about being a new guy is better than veteran players bleating on about what new guys should think about this game. And that last point is important, because during the course of making this video I realised that there is a whole bunch of lofty pompous arseholes enthusiastically beating down on critics and telling everyone what they should think and should feel about this game. Like an angry disciplinarian father explaining to their gay son why becoming a florist is for girly men and he really should want to join the Marines. I will be transparent about the fact that I have not beaten the whole of Elden Ring prior to making this video. I would have loved to, but it's my first Souls game, and if I waited until that happened, I would be making this video sometime in 2023. Although it's worth noting that I probably will still be playing this game next year, which is a good sign. I'm taking it slow, methodical, with lots of failure thrown in for good measure. It's taken me ages to work through the game, and I just opened up a new area and realised the game is even bigger than I thought it was. So I had to cool time and crack on with the review. Besides, I love playing video games and analysing them. Being extremely unskilled does not necessarily mean my opinions are invalid. I know a health inspector who shut down 3 restaurants, 2 for cockroaches in the food, and another because the sous chef was beating one out in the cream of cauliflower sauce. Now, my mate only eats food and he can't cook for shit, but I think his opinions of restaurants are absolutely spot on. I suppose for the record I should qualify what a Souls game is. A Souls-like, also known as Soulsborne, is a subgenre of action role-playing games known for high levels of difficulty and emphasis on environmental storytelling, inspired by the dark fantasy genre. I totally read that from Wikipedia, although anyone familiar with the channel would have assumed that. Souls games are a genre, people take them very seriously. From Software apparently did the first one, and they have a hardcore following. And frankly, frequently, they can be very hard. So with all these qualifications having been qualified, I guess it's time to slip on the armoured gauntlets and get this gynecological exam underway. So what is Elden Ring? Elden Ring is an openish worldish action-adventure RPG-ish fantasy video game developed by From Software, famous for making other Souls games, and published by Bandai Namco, a merger of companies that are collectively famous for holy shit levels of publishing legacy video games and franchises. Dark Souls, Galaxian, Tekken, Gundam, Ridge Racer, Ace Combat, and Pac-Man. They are basically the anti-Ubisoft. Elden Ring is released on Xbox, PlayStation, and 85% released on PC, with the PC port hopefully actually getting finished at some point this year. As long as they're not too busy, of course. I don't want to bother them too much. In Elden Ring you play the role of a non-gendered body type, because progressive video game journalists banned gender in video games years ago. But I'll give you a hint. The one on the left is smuggling something in his pants. The one on the right has tits. You figure it out. You wander around a mythical, vaguely plotless fantasy world populated with scant coherent logic or plot development, some of which is still being theory crafted by the developer. It's basically a very beautiful, rich, textured fantasy realm, primarily organised around the story structure of kill that dude, then kill that dude, then kill that other dude, rinse and repeat. I heard that a lot of the inspiration for the game comes from the game director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, reading Western fantasy books in his youth. Although at the time he didn't really know much English. Not even kidding. So one way to conceptualise the story world of Elden Ring is this. Imagine reading Lord of the Rings in Japanese, only you're not Japanese and don't speak much of the language. Now make a video game inspired by it. It all worked out rather well in the end, but anyone looking for a strong narrative driven plot is on a fool's errand. Even the official wiki doesn't know what the fuck is going on in this game. Best to just crack on with killing stuff and not bother your pretty head about it. I did try and watch a few videos about the lore in Elden Ring, and whilst they were very knowledgeable, they weren't particularly useful in helping me understand exactly what shit is going on here, to whom, and why. With the best intentions in the world, they were themselves presenting unexplained other stuff to explain stuff about this stuff. Every explanation seemed to be based on other stuff that required an explanation too, which wasn't provided. Have you ever tried to have a rational conversation with someone from some obscure hardcore Christian sect? The sort that live in a compound run by some charismatic leader who bones all the chicks? The lore is a bit like that. People will tell you stuff that might make sense in their heads because they are making all kinds of assumptions you're not privy to. But for us non-believers, it's probably just best to nod politely and edge towards the nearest fire escape. Elden Ring is vague, obscure, has dragons, magic and wizards. That's all you really need, and should expect to ever know. In Elden Ring, you kill sheep, pick berries, get one-shotted a lot, go shopping, collect animal shit, fall off cliffs, run away from large scary monsters, loot conveniently placed skulls full of money so that From Software can stealth scale the in-game rune grinding economy, get free boob snuggles, constantly chug on your health potion by accident when you're at full health, hang out in the world's most depressing clubhouse, collect shiny loot, pick more berries, accidentally jump your pony off a cliff, again, spend far too much time obsessing about your appearance, wander into rooms and immediately die, spend an extraordinary amount of time fucking around with the world's least user-friendly equipment screen, tinkering with gear and weapons about which you understand not one fuck, give up and start choosing weapons and armour based solely on how cool they look, spend ages trying to beat a boss just so you can get past the building and unlock another part of the map, only to discover afterwards that there was a little path that ran entirely around the whole shithole castle which you would have spotted if you had been paying more attention earlier in the game. It's basically a dysfunctional, violent, dangerous spiritual fantasy afterlife shithole, where, armed only with some rusty weapons and an even rustier fucking interface on the PC port at least, you stride out into a maelstrom, possibly in your pants if you choose the wrong starting class, and, if you don't refund the game on Steam within 2 hours, you will get a free horse. Probably. Only the horse looks more like the offspring of a donkey that got drunk and fucked a goat. Possibly a pig. Who knows? I wasn't at that party. But for ease, I'm going to refer to it as a pig pony, even if it does look like someone glued 2 unicorn horns on its head. Bicorns, I guess. This pony isn't going to be winning any ribbons at pony shows, but it does do a double jump, so technically it can fly really badly for a few feet. Still, it's free I guess, so I shouldn't complain too much. Besides, you never look a pig pony in the mouth. At the risk of grossly oversimplifying Elden Ring, antagonising an entire fanbase, yet again, and trivialising this game, if I had to sum it up like a shit band review in a local free newspaper, I would say that Elden Ring is Edge of Tomorrow meets World of Warcraft, with tones of Guantanamo Bay. And here is my logic. It's like Edge of Tomorrow because it strongly deploys the same Groundhog Day world reset mechanics, with the exceptions of official bosses and unique loot drops. When you die, or rest at a spirit rest stop, the world essentially resets, with the possible exception of your character stats, your gear, your choices and your character's trajectory. let's give this an example. If you're trying to kill some random boss, if you die, all the NPCs and the boss resets. If you kill the boss, he's gone for good. But frequently the trash mobs might repop later. Similarly, if you farm all the mobs in one location, die or rest at the spirit fountain thing, when you get back all the NPCs are repopped, back where they were, ready to get farmed again. I think this might be a staple feature of Souls games, ergo the death/reset cycle. Oh, and when you die all your money falls on the floor and you have to pick it up ASAP, because if you die again before picking it up, that is gone for good. It's like World of Warcraft because you do lots of grinding to level up. If you get killed trying to do a hard quest, you have to res up and try again. Frequently, you will head off to grind to get better gear and level up more. So, that quest that keeps killing you becomes easy enough to complete without dying. You rinse and repeat this cycle. Only unlike World of Warcraft, Elden Ring does not shove any microtransactions and mounts for cash bullshit in your grill. The game has tones of Guantanamo Bay because, whilst much of the game is exploration, grinding, killing and excitement, sometimes you will get to parts which are infuriating, frustrating and incredibly difficult. You might spend half an hour trying to navigate a set of platforms which scale down the side of a cliff, dying over and over, whilst you gradually not only learn, but have to master every single jump, until you could eventually make all 10 jumps perfectly in a row without cocking it up. You might come to a boss fight and relentlessly try for many hours, failing at some different critical point on every try. Sometimes the game has moments of perfectly distilled focused suffering, where the best possible potential outcome is, at some point eventually a long time in the future, you might get released from your prison cell. Functionality and fuckery. Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Elden Ring is veritably bipolar in its execution. From a moral, consumer and ethical perspective, it's a saint amongst sinners. From an implementation standpoint, particularly from the perspective of the PC port, it's a clown car, being driven the wrong way down a one-way street, doing twice the speed limit, driven by a clown who is off his tits on meth and moonshine, with his cock hanging out, as he's driving past the infant school playground, sticking his fingers up at the kids. I'm not saying the PC port is bad, because it's worse than that. I'm saying that the phrase PC port probably has a technical and legal definition, and I doubt Elden Ring on PC fully qualifies according to all the terms and conditions. But more of this later. The first thing we need to address is the situation where a bunch of developers called out Elden Ring on social media and started criticising the game for a host of reasons. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because it's a video's worth of hearsay and Twitter spatting, and to comment with authority would require a lot of research of wading knee deep through the cesspool of Twitter. However, for the sake of this review I must reference Ahmed Samala, who is either formerly or currently from Ubisoft, for his criticisms of the user interface. Needless to say, all these guys trying to fling shit at Elden Ring got a generally bad reception on Twitter, and deservedly so. Let's be fair, Twitter is a giant toilet. If you start flinging your shit at other people, there is lots of shit around for other people to fling back at you. So much so in fact that some of these devs have had to lock their Twitter accounts. But I simply need to note that I am consciously aware of this debate, because I am going to criticise the fucked up shitfest of a UI that I've had to deal with on PC. Now, Ahmed Salama is a veteran developer and has many fine games under his belt. But riddle me this: why the fuck would someone from Ubisoft think they would not get dogpiled for getting all haughty on Twitter and throwing shade on a video game that is 10 times better than any video game Ubisoft has made in a decade? That's like me shuffling into a gym, eating chips with a cigarette hanging off my lower lip, going over to the Smith machine and telling the bodybuilder, "Nah mate, you don't want to do it like that." I mean, he might well be doing it wrong, but he ain't going to listen to me. Besides, I've seen some of the games Ahmed Salama has worked on, and frankly the user interfaces look like kaleidoscopic word salads boring themselves into the player's eyes. Like someone took every readout from every instrument in an F-35 Biter and tried to cram it all into the heads-up display. Modern video game interfaces these days are frequently turning into info spam, which impede the game, not help it. It's like the information and notifications about microtransactions take priorities over the game. It's like some kid that just discovered add-ons in World of Warcraft and installed all of them. And frequently it feels like someone driving a car with a frozen up windscreen and they only scraped a tiny little bit clean and they're trying to drive by squinting through the slit. But make no mistake, the UI in Elden Ring is shit, on PC at least. Most likely not for the reasons he stated, but fuck me, it really is terribly shit for a whole host of reasons. But it's important that you realise that I'm not piling into Ahmed Ubichoke Salama's clown car and tooting the horn for him whilst he's driving past the school. But holy shit on a stick. On PC, I have many grievances about this failed PC port attempt at an interface. And please note that I may well be complaining about things where there might be solutions. But if I can't figure these things out after this amount of game time, then this is still pretty bad implementation itself. I have no issue with the general minimalism and low impact design. Frankly, I think it's brilliant. But this is some heavy duty retrograde Square Enix levels of shitting the game out of the door without finishing the player interface. And before the fanboys like that woman in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, calm down and think about this. Why does the game install on PC defaulted to console controls only, so you can barely navigate the UI at all and most of the keys don't work, making many players wrongly think the game is unplayable on PC and immediately refunding it? Seriously, why would you ship a game on PC defaulted to console controls so it requires an hour of internet research to find out how to get to the menu command to swap it back? Why the fuck do the console controller defaults totally override your keyboard and lock out certain keys instead of adding to them? Seriously, why does turning your controller on in the settings deactivate lots of your keybinds? Why the fuck can I not manually input a capped frame rate? Why is there no field of view adjustment? When I'm in the advanced settings, why does hitting escape bomb me right back out of the menus rather than back out one level? Why can I only back out one level by using the button Q? Q? What the fuck is that about? And why can't I just click on the button with my mouse on the screen like normal video games made this century? Why do I have to use the precise key? Unlike most games that allow you to click on the button illustrated on the screen as well. Why can't I change my map button key? Why are there no hotkeys? Why does the game sometimes follow generally accepted practices and sometimes not? There are established codes and conventions for this shit, and even if you don't think this matters, this game is not internally consistent according to its own rule set. It's janky as all fuck. I shit ye not, I have seen some bad ports in my day, but Elden Ring has raised the bar on lazy arse no fucks given low effort porting. Have you ever bought an electrical device from eBay and it arrived with all the text menus and instruction manual in Chinese so you couldn't turn it on or even change the settings? Have you ever had some shithead change your phone language to Japanese and then watch you squirm trying to set it back again? Well, that's Elden Ring on PC. There is a reason why I don't buy sex toys from eBay anymore, and it's not just the electrocution risk, which is significant. If Elden Ring had shipped with Chinese as its default language, that would have only increased its issues by about 4%. The map navigation was piss poor. Seriously, zero effort was made to utilise keyboard and mouse. I couldn't even navigate the map itself with the mouse because that functionality wasn't even turned on. It's a PC game with a mouse. But oh no, moving around the map and clicking on places using the mouse just makes too much sense. Let's just force the player to cycle through every last fast travel point in the entire zone. Because that's what they do on a console controller. So why make the effort? I had 3 precise levels of zoom, no zoom scroll, and I had to use my strafe left button to select. This is 100% pure console navigation, and they didn't even bother to do anything other than assign keystrokes to the associated buttons, many of which arbitrarily overlap each other. I have a whole keyboard here to utilise, and not all the keys are jammed up with cum. Any chance I can bind different things to different keys? Why is my target selection button also my back out of menu 1 level button? Why is my confirm button also my strafe left button? Why is my run button also my roll button? This is exactly the kind of cake and arse party you get when someone simply directly ports over an 11 button system from a controller and tries to wedge every interaction into that same framework on PC. It's corner cutting of the worst kind, and part of the reason I make a big deal about this kind of lazy ass substandard fuckery is that it's a problem in video games that is getting progressively worse. Why? Well, my pet theory is that it's got a lot to do with compliance guidelines and more specifically, cloud gaming. The AAA industry sees cloud gaming as our collective future, whether we want it or not. And we mostly don't. And they are just going to try and ram it down everyone's throats. By force. Just like microtransactions, they want to just enforce the practice until such time as we stop kicking and struggling and just accept our fate. Many games that are listed as PC games on these cloud services already come with no mouse and keyboard support. None. You have to play them streamed to your PC, but play them using a controller. That is their vision of the future. You will play on cloud services. You will stream your games over the internet. You will not own your games library. You will not own your own save files. Everyone will be using a console controller. Well, good luck with flight simulators and real-time strategy then. So yeah, if I seem a bit animated about shit porting, it's because if we don't complain enough, the industry may well stop bothering with any mouse and keyboard functionality in video games at all. Seriously, I can't even set up the game so hitting I opens my inventory. I can't set up my game so that hitting M opens my map. I have to hit escape, use my mouse to click on the inventory, and then I'm in. But it doesn't stop there. When I'm in my gear storage, that has hard-baked console controls too. I can move my mouse all over the screen, but the mouse is either locked out of my bag inventory or locked out of my storage inventory. You have to manually reselect to swap between interacting with each side of the screen. It's fucking ridiculous. Is it so much to ask that I can use my mouse over here and then use it over here without pressing buttons down here? Did they outsource this work to a fucking monkey? This is tragic. Think about it, this is a PC video game where your mouse doesn't work on both sides of the screen at the same time. I'm frankly expecting their next game to operate their inventory using a racing game gear stick selector, or maybe a Thrustmaster throttle control. There are all sorts of rumours and accusations about a inventory bug, with things going missing and things returning to people's bags after they've been put in the storage chest. I honestly don't know how real or perceived these problems are. Personally, I thought I had these issues until I realised that by default, everything in my inventory is set to auto restock, because they fucked up everything else with the inventory page. Why stop now? It's highly likely that any new player is going to be constantly putting things in their chest, then coming back later only to unwittingly have the game put it all back in their bag. You don't need to be a fucking rocket scientist to figure out that auto restocking should by default be set to off. New players won't even know that restocking is a thing, so obviously they will be throwing stuff in the chest, then coming back, scratching their heads and wondering what is going on. It's all back in my bag. Like I said, this isn't rocket science, but even if it was, would it kill them to include a tooltip or just implement some mechanism that lets the player know? Or have it set to off by default maybe? I understand the minimalism, and I both respect that and frankly like it. But there is a difference between minimalism and having to use multiple controls to simply cursor across your screen, and having some gremlin stuff everything back in your bag without you knowing every single time you turn around. There is nothing minimalistic about using 2 keystrokes and a mouse just to take something out of your fucking storage chest. So yes, sadly, the Ubisoft devs mocking the UI definitely knew who was guilty, but they charged them with the wrong crime. On PC, this game gives you no more control and functionality than you get on console, even if you're using a controller. It's 2022, and someone released a game where you need to use your mouse and your keyboard simply to use your mouse on both sides of the same fucking screen. So yeah, if you ever hear someone say there's nothing wrong with the UI on PC, please laugh at them. Still, I was perfectly happy to watch Ubisoft's slightly bitter griping get grilled on social media. And let's be honest, the memes are entirely correct. If Ubisoft had made this game, the UI would have been a rainbow glitter informational snowstorm of redundant pachinko grade face spam, and notifications about shite they wanted you to buy in the in-game shop. And the game itself would be boring. Boring, and no doubt have some kind of towers you needed to unlock. On a positive note, Elden Ring did have a very minimalistic terms of service though. For once I didn't feel like I was signing away my organ donating consent, my privacy, my legal rights and my soul just for launching a video game. And whilst we're on more positive subjects, the camera view gave me a brain aneurysm. I shit ye not. It was atrocious. The camera always seemed to have its own agenda different to mine, so the jitteriness really started to fuck with my neurons after a while. I was constantly fighting it all the time. I'm not exactly sure what was going wrong here. When riding a horse and doing a quick strafe to see what was going on either side of me, or just changing my view with the mouse whilst riding over terrain, it's like the computer was trying to say no. It seemed to constantly try to slightly reset the view in tiny increments, mainly in the vertical plane. But I'm perfectly capable of doing that myself, thank you very much. In fact, that's why I was doing it. All the time I was moving the mouse, the camera seems to be taking each movement as a cue to try and slightly do what it thought was best. It's some weapons grade annoyance. So yes, if you're wondering why my camera is jerking around so much when I'm riding my pig pony, please note that as unpleasant as it is for you, at least you just have to watch it and not trying to play with it. Being my first Souls game, I found the bosses hard enough as it was, so I'm not particularly happy about failing because my camera view is fucking up. You can't have these kinds of combat mechanics and a dysfunctional UI with console based interaction systems. I'm sure some bright spark will pipe up in the comment section about how I should get better at the game. To which I would retort, I'm sure I should. And maybe in return, From Software should demonstrate the same unforgiving and perfectionist attitude about their own handiwork as they demand from us in the combat. Despite its lack of optimization, jittery mouse recentering and all around UI retardation, it was actually very stable on PC. I have experienced no bugs that I am aware of, and it has crashed once in 100 hours of play. So yeah, I've heard a lot of discussion about stability and performance, but on my admittedly slightly better than average gaming rig, it ran perfectly fine. And the cooling fans didn't roar like turbojets, like they do when I normally play The Division 2. There has been much debate about whether Elden Ring deserves 10 out of 10 across the board, and some scepticism about people already declaring this game of the year 2022. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Elden Ring wins worst PC port of the year, perhaps the decade. In fact, I would probably have to do a few days research to find any PC port that was this fucky, amateurish and shamelessly unfinished. In fact, that is too kind. This PC port has barely even started. Regardless of this, the game released a month ago, so unless someone has a time-travelling DeLorean, it's possibly a little early to be declaring Elden Ring the best game of 2022. Ultimately, and despite all of this griping, absolute respect must go to Elden Ring and From Software for the absence of any commercial fuckery. They totally boycotted all bullshit microtransactions, monetization, loot boxes and pay to win, and just sold a fine game for a fixed price, and seem to have slightly broken the AAA video game industry in the process. Seriously, the whole of the video game industry is scratching their collective empty heads like bimbling village idiots and saying, "I don't understand, we made a really shit video game full of microtransactions and paywalled content, but instead everyone seems to prefer playing Elden Ring, and you can't even buy loot boxes in that game." The precise reasons why AAA publishers don't understand why Elden Ring is winning are the same reasons why AAA publishers are failing, and why they're now largely despised by their own customers. So yes, From Software wins my absolute and unreserved respect for their business ethics and acumen, and the honourable way in which they have discharged their duties and prosecuted this project. Respect that is somewhat tarnished by hiring 2 tramps and a fucking baboon to organise the PC port. Easy come, easy go, I guess. The combat and gameplay. Well, apparently a kukri is now a throwing knife. That's unpleasant. Blackie Thomas will no doubt have something to say about that.
But it means chopper, which means axe or hatchet.
The kukri is possibly one of the best all-round combat and bushcraft tools ever devised, which has been in service with Nepalese regiments for as long as there have been records. But I can't really think of a worse knife to use as a throwing weapon. I mean, you could theoretically throw a Colt 1911 at someone. I'm sure if you hit them in the fucking eye it would really sting. However, I would personally opt to shoot the weapon at them. The kukri is primarily a chopping tool used for bushcraft, and also serves as an exemplary chopping weapon. And a 19-second Google search would have told them that. Small trivialities aside, the combat is best described as visceral. I never thought that harassing sheep could be a worthy minigame in its own right. Not even kidding. If someone took just the start of this game where you ride around the starting area killing all the sheep on horseback and they released it as a standalone title, it would not be the worst game I've ever reviewed. It wouldn't even be the worst game I've reviewed this year. Ubisoft should possibly take note of this. I opted for a hybridised arcane stealth caster and melee build. Did I fuck? I'm a simple man. I put on the heaviest armour I could find, equipped the biggest piece of sharp or blunt metal that I could pilfer. I jumped on my now creaking pig pony and just rode around smacking people in their head as hard as I possibly could. It's not a sophisticated strategy, but I'm not a particularly sophisticated person. Anyway, I spend most of my time sheep bothering and picking berries. For those activities, my two-dimensional approach was optimal. I am thoroughly enjoying the combat, even if I don't know 90% of what's going on at any given moment. And if anyone watching this has experience of playing Souls games, you will appreciate this statement is not an exaggeration. The weapon and build mechanics is an almost bottomless pit of interacting gear qualities, systems, boss mechanics, perks, spells, counters, Mitigation, stats, soft caps and hard caps. I won't make any claim to understand more than a fraction of what is going on at any given time. But I at least managed to figure out that armour protects me and that my sword scales well with strength and dexterity. Piling points into vitality gives me health, and putting a few points into endurance gave me a little survivability, and more importantly, the ability to walk around decked out in even bigger, heavier, more ridiculous looking weapons and armour. At face value, the weapons look beautiful, sound meaty, and they are delightful to use. They have varied and sometimes bespoke animation sets, effects and appearances, much of which is significant. Apparently. Although generally, twatting things with large heavy metal objects is pretty much the limits of my martial knowledge. One very important point is this. How hard is Elden Ring? There is much discussion about the game's alleged difficulty, with some people flatly stating Elden Ring is too hard. And I need to address this assertion for two very important reasons. 1. Even as a professional elite sub-low skill cap level player, I'm managing, albeit very slowly and with extra cheese, but I am managing. 2. The question is to a degree redundant, because I don't think Elden Ring technically has a finite and fixed difficulty level. Now at endgame, what I'm about to say might turn out to be complete bullshit. But certainly from the perspective of my own experience, new players with less than 10 hours played, and mainstream video game journalists who may not have played the game at all, at this level of play, there is very little that is locked behind skill checks. Sure, you might wander into the wrong cave and get slaughtered, you might not be capable of pulling off certain jumps, and there will be areas where one wrong move and you're dead. But as a general rule, you are not routinely forced into impossibly hard situations where you have no choice in the matter. If you run out into the starting area with a shit rag wrapped around your waist and start trying to kill the first boss, like most people do, sure, the game will seem incredibly hard. In fact, for most mere mortals, killing any of the bosses or mini-bosses is going to seem insanely hard at level 1. I'm sure skilled players can ace it, but you don't have to run straight at the bosses, loincloth in hand, with a spunky attitude and a slightly defective leather shield. If you can't do something, you can go and grind some better gear and come back later. With the exception of some pretty tricky platform jumping, there isn't much in this game that is 100% skill based, unless you want it to be. It's skill plus gear, and whilst your skill level might be determined by genetics, experience and sobriety, the player is totally in control of the gear and levelling. So talking about the difficulty level as if it's fixed and set in stone is slightly disingenuous. Personally, I over-level, I over-gear, and this compensates for my fundamental absence of skill, and despite making incredibly slow progress, I'm enjoying myself and gradually taking down the bosses, albeit at a snail's pace. That is a very long way of saying the Elden Ring grind set is certainly central to my playstyle because the game is as hard or as easy as you want it to be. If you are struggling with a boss, then go and kill some sheep, go to the shop, sell your crap and buy some new Harry Potter outfit or some weapons, level up a bit and try again. Similarly, and only if you're immune to spoilers, there is an absolute cornucopia of guides, walkthroughs, tips and tricks videos and resources about the game out there at your disposal. I apologise now, and I don't want anything I'm about to say to come across as patronising or condescending, so I will say this very carefully and with absolute respect. There is this thing called the internet. There is a wire coming out of the back of your personal PC computer that plugs into the wall. That goes out into the street and off for thousands of miles until it reaches the internet. I don't know exactly where the internet literally is, but it is there, and it's like a giant box with information stuff in it. If you're completely stuck, ask your nan how to use the internet. No doubt she's probably using it to hook up some casual sex on Christian dating websites or Grindr, whatever elderly relatives do these days. It's all out there. I mostly opt for spoiler-free play, but I have used guides because I want a new bow to cheese with. But if you get stuck, there's lots of ways you can look up your solutions. It is worth noting that there is considerable scope for cheesing if you're desperate, and with my particular lack of skills, this came in very handy. Take this bear for example. I couldn't kill it there, so I shot it in the head at close range while it was taking a nap, then ran down the road, let it reset, came back and did it again, rinse and repeat, for 20 minutes. And now it's dead. I know some people will consider this to be shameless, but in my defence, the bear is dead. I am alive, and the loot is in my bag. There is no other critical metrics here. Besides, the bear was very, very dumb indeed. Look, I know some people will judge me because of my playstyle, but what the fuck do you expect? I once developed my own martial arts discipline based solely on moves you could do on someone whilst they're asleep. My personal video game philosophy is Infinium Vium Fac Caesium. That is Latin for find a way or cheese one. Probably. The weapons and skills eventually become complex. When you initially start playing the game, it's very much a case of twat people with your pointy stick and run away if you get your ass kicked. However, once I started getting a few interesting items, suddenly I entered the world of internet research, trying to work out which weapons were best, which scaled with which stats, what Ashes of War worked best with which weapons and builds, and where I'm ultimately going to invest my levelling up points, what I'm going to spend my money on, and which weapons I was going to spend my upgrade stones on. It all looked like a bit of a headache, so I just kept riding around harassing sheep for a while. That said, be warned. The upgrade stones for your weapons seem to be at best scarce and at worst finite, so don't do what I did and try and upgrade practically everything. I have a strong suspicion that at some point someone is going to say, "You didn't want to do that, mate." The combat cycle could be reduced to this grave oversimplification. Mana, stamina, gear, player stats, counters, timing, dodge rolling, healing potions, mana potions, a truckload of potential consumables, and where you are on the skill versus gear spectrum. Sure, they actually call mana focus points, but it's mana. It's blue, it comes in fucking bottles, it does magic. It's mana. Put very simply, enemies have certain attacks and frequently they have attack routines. The player has gear and a finite amount of resources. Some bubbles back up, like stamina, some is gone when it's used or lost, like health. You have a capped number of potion bottles that you can fill with health or mana potions. You have your gear. The nasty men attack you, and you try not to die. Often dodge rolling precisely when they attack will help. But if they do an AoE attack, you need to figure out it's coming and run away. You might try and block certain things with your shield, which drains your stamina based on the strength of the attack. Swinging your sword depletes your stamina. You do more dodging because it's an OP mechanic. You try and seize the opportunity to put some damage in. Around and around the Ferris wheel turns. Most enemies hit very hard, so not getting hit is frequently more important than hitting. This all coalesces into the following maxim. If you bum rush an enemy and start wailing on it with your sword with no fucks given about what enemy you're dealing with and what's going on, you had better pray it's weak. Because just battering on things usually results in you running out of stamina, becoming vulnerable, and then getting twatted a lot in return, running out of health potions, and then ultimately running out of not being dead. It's vastly, and I mean vastly more complicated than that. But the essential thing is, Different enemies do different attacks. When you learn this, and if you time it right, you can avoid getting twatted and know when you have the opportunity to twat them back. Or you just go to Hogwarts, learn a load of magic spells, nuke everything with death rays from max range, and then go to a rest point for a quick wank and a nap. Ultimately, it's worth noting that very skilled players with extensive knowledge of the game can perform miraculous takedowns, and I've unverified rumours of low-level players beating the game. Sure, some of these players might be doing second playthroughs with bags full of gear, but the statement still stands. If you know exactly when to dodge, when to sneak, when to parry, and time all your counters and blocks with absolute precision and not a little luck, even the most shockingly difficult bosses can technically be beaten if you are just very, very good. All this being said, the combat in the game is as complex as you want it to be, but only as simple as the enemy mechanics allow. You will have to learn some basic tactics and techniques and apply them at least semi-well in order to beat certain bosses, or know enough to over-level and deploy cheese mechanics. But if you want to master the game and optimise your character, well, that's a journey that will never end. You could theoretically spend whole days researching which bow is best, finding out where it is and trying to get one. There are spreadsheets about which weapons scale best with different stats and the damage output they produce, depending on which Ashes of War you combine them with, although doing all of that would admittedly eat into my busy sheep fucking schedule. The game has the Kingdom Come Deliverance factor. Basically, whatever level you're at and however good your gear, if you do something stupid, you can still get yourself killed easily. Even relatively low level enemy do very respectable damage. They might have become insanely easy to kill, but they can still kill you under the right circumstances. This is doubly true if you have more than one on you. If you stop paying attention when you're grinding and faceplant into a group of low level mobs, it's surprisingly easy to get dismounted, stun locked and killed before you can even chug on a potion. You have to figure stuff out based on experience. I haven't said much about magic because I haven't used it much. Do I sound like I went to Hogwarts? I guess I might try it out on my next playthrough because frankly, firing space lasers at targets whilst running away seems like a much more relaxed method of playing the game. How much magic you integrate into your playstyle is up to you. You can magically imbue certain weapons with the power of Hogwarts, so hitting someone with your little trainer sword can end up doing a shit ton of devastating magical damage. But that's about as much as I know. Sorry, I can't give you more information about the magical system in Elden Ring. Nearly all of my knowledge about magic is confined to what I picked up whilst watching reruns of Charmed. And if I'm being completely honest, I spent most of my time staring at the boobs. I don't really remember what the girls were saying most of the time. The entirety of the gear and character building is deep and complex. It's deep in as much as the interplay between the different systems allows the development of some outstanding builds and fairly distinct playstyles. Apparently, it's complex in as much as it's so complicated and convoluted that if I'm still playing this game in a year's time, I probably still won't understand what the fuck is going on half the time. If anyone here is training to be an IT support specialist, well, thank your lucky stars you're not getting certified training in Elden Ring, because this shit is impenetrable. The complexity combined with the seemingly endless gear and level grinding permutations means that you have almost unlimited scope in how you build and evolve your character. You can be an assassin, a warrior, a mage, a warrior mage, a hybrid of everything, as long as you fulfill certain basic criteria, like not being over encumbered so you can't roll for shit, and not having a tiny health pool so you can't survive for shit. The potential scope of creative character building is endless. If you are fanatical about this game, you can keep levelling up until you have max stats of 99 across the board, taking you to level 713, and then go and grind all the gear. But I also heard a rumour that on completion you can restart the playthrough, opt to keep all your gear and then go again. The world is your lobster, as they say. Just note that the levels themselves get progressively more expensive every time you level up. Level 1 is a bargain and costs a mere 673 space runes. Level 2 costs 689, 16 runes more. By level 20 the price has risen to 2,857. I'm sure you can see where this is all going. I'm not sure if that is technically getting exponentially more expensive, but it's certainly doing a damn good impression. I was tempted to read the entire price list out and make it a 10-part series, but got tired after reading out 3, but suffice it to say, it eventually gets blisteringly costly to level up. At level 500, it costs 3,335,103 runes to level up, bringing the grand total expenditure at this point to 457,746,111. 500 million runes, near as damn it. This being said, there are ways you can grind cheese vast sums of money in very short periods of time. I think from leeching in certain areas and from aggroing certain mobs so they die from falling off a cliff and resetting it hundreds and hundreds of times. Personally, this sort of activity is not my style and I generally frown at full-on cheesing. Just kidding. So what's my overall take of Elden Ring? Well, right off the bat, your initial experience of this game will primarily be determined by one single factor. Is this your first Souls game? If it is, then you will likely find the game impenetrable, difficult and frequently frustrating. At first. If it is not your first Souls game, you will likely understand most of the obscure mechanics and systems, be engaged with debates online about whether or not it's way too easy. You will automatically love this game because that is what the High Priestess of Souls-like instructed you to think, and certainly from what I've observed, possibly scoffing at first time players and generally dumping ballistic levels of hate on anyone who doesn't like Elden Ring. And let's be honest here, this game doesn't really tell the new player much at all. I had to go onto the internet to figure out how spellcasting works. I mean, works at all. I mean, it barely tells you about these gizmos you have to equip to make them work, or that you need to memorise the spells, and that you need a wand, maybe. As a newcomer to the franchise, I naturally hated this game at first. I only reviewed it because I was on a promise and knuckled down for 10 to 20 hours of miserable gaming hell where I assumed I would rage quit at some point and then make a review telling everyone what a crock of shite it was, and that it was a game that would solely appeal to masochists, tryhards, and the sort of people that pay to dress up in rubber dog masks and latex and have prostitutes beat on them. Or worse. Initially I wasn't having much fun at all, and I thought the game was an overhyped pile of used wank rags. But then a strange series of events happened. I spoke to a mate about it, and he responded that he absolutely loved this game, and on a level that frankly shocked me. I had a non-Souls fan saying things like, "I've not had a game grip me like this since Oblivion." That is high praise indeed. So I hunkered down, puckered up and kept grafting at this impossible game in the hope that I would see at least a glimmer of redemption through the growing pile of used Kleenex. I will be upfront about the fact that I was entirely sceptical of this game for multiple reasons. The genre has a fanatical fanbase which is never conducive to reasonable discourse. Just go onto a Bethesda forum and type, "I thought Fallout New Vegas was boring," and see what happens to you. But on top of that, there was the bizarro review cycle. I'm highly suspicious of mainstream journalists at the best of times. These across the board gushing obsequious 10 out of 10 reviews are factually bullshit. Based on my experience and observations made by other commentators such as Upper Echelon Gaming, I think it's safe to assert the following. Elden Ring is a vast, expansive, complex, multifaceted game. Many mainstream game reviewers are busy on Instagram. They get an early access copy maybe a week before launch, on top of all their other work, like virtue signalling on Twitter, cancelling people and supporting critical race theory, they also have to squeeze in a little time to review this game. Now, I'm sure there might be the odd, genuine reviewer who is the real deal, games hard, and knows this genre. But Jesus fuck, are we really supposed to believe that an entire army of mainstream shitheels played this game flat out for 7 days straight, beat the game, and had time to write the reviews? I don't feel qualified to review this game, and I've racked up 3 figures in game time. Look, mainstream reviewers routinely attack games for being too impenetrable or too hard, yet for some reason, with Elden Ring they just quickly cranked out their reviews, gave it 10 out of 10 across the board, overlooked all its shortcomings, and then walked away. Did they just all get on Game Journo Pros, have a chat and agree collectively to just give it full marks and get the fuck out of there for fear of a player backlash if they were too critical? And let's be real here, if you say negative things about games with fanatical followers, you will get backlash. Similarly, I see people fluff off games to win supporters all the damn time. Frankly, most mainstream video game reviews can broadly speaking be categorised into 2 general themes: politically motivated activist hit pieces, or popularity contests. So yes, the 10 out of 10 blanket bombing by mainstream reviewers is highly suspect. Then there are the wild discrepancies between user and review scores. Evidenced by customer ratings, there is a clear disparity between the mainstream narrative and what players actually think. I'm talking roughly 10 out of 10 for mainstream reviewers compared to about 7 out of 10 for players. That's a sizable difference. And let's be real, these days the new normal is that mainstream reviewers say one thing and the players usually always think the opposite. So when I see a 10 out of 10 from mainstream game journos, I'm going to assume that the game is a bit crap. There are even commentators and pundits making videos attacking people for criticising or disliking this game, because apparently dissent is not to be tolerated. And attacking is the right word here. I've watched some of these videos and they're disgraceful. I'm talking larger channels punching down on people that didn't like the game, encouraging dogpiling and describing them as being handicapped, and generally piling on abuse and encouraging other people to do the same. This is some real pond scum antics that will discourage any kind of criticism or deviation from the established narrative. This is the sort of shit I'm used to seeing from progressive activists, but it's always sad to see allegedly credible gaming commentators brigading against people for merely not liking their favourite game. And let's be honest, a lot of the time this is all being done for clout. It's about saying what appeals to the angry mob, so they think you are their friend. Personally, I can see why the fans like it. I can see why some new converts like it, but anyone pretending this game is a 10 out of 10 and only has a few minor bugs and issues, well frankly my dear, they are fucking delusional. So I'm sorry if I'm shitting in anyone's slippers, but Elden Ring, whilst excelling in many areas and completely appealing to its target audience, has more issues than a teenage junkie prostitute. Certainly on PC at least. Whether or not you think this is a 10 out of 10 game, the mainstream reviews are still suspect, and it is not a 10 out of 10 game. I'm sorry, but on PC some of the buttons don't even work, and it only lets you rebind a handful of things on a keyboard with 104 keys, and it launched unplayable on PC unless you did some homework and research on how to unlock the console settings. 7 out of 10? Too low. 8 or 9? That would be my ballpark. 10? Fuck off. There is a reason why average user reviews are hovering between 7 and 8. I can see why this is a 10 for many people, but it is not universally a 10 out of 10. Frankly, on PC, they really owe everyone an apology. So yes, going into this review I was highly sceptical of Elden Ring. Frankly, it certainly appeared like a slightly niche video game with factually documented issues being ferociously and aggressively defended by a hardcore fanbase, which frankly is basically the case. I just didn't expect that I would eventually start to like it. I can't make any definitive statements about what is going on with the reviews, but I'm incredibly curious about this whole phenomenon. However, with hindsight, this is my wild guess. Mainstream reviewers shit the bed and gave this game 10 out of 10 because they were scared. Most of them probably barely played the game past the starting zone. 70% of players love this game. 30% of players simply don't get along with the game's playstyle, mechanics, impenetrable systems, and balkedness on PC. I personally think it's a good game, but I can see why it's simply not going to fly with a significant proportion of gamers. Let's face it, it does not have universal appeal. Doesn't even have universal mouse control. Valheim is a brilliant game, but if you like PvP, guns and hate building stuff, you probably ain't gonna like that game either. The world of Elden Ring is without doubt absolutely beautiful, as is the art design, the soundscaping, the voice acting, the characterisation, and the general spectacular sweep of this ambitious game. Best graphics ever seen in a video game? Fuck no. My mouse constantly jitters around when I'm riding around on my pig pony, so unless there's a special category for best jittery graphics, it's not going to win best graphics ever made. And notably, it doesn't even have photo mode support, which frankly is a massive omission, and a significant own goal by the developer. But it is a very, very pretty open world. I will give them that. Seriously. It's slightly derivative in some ways, and original in others. Lots of it was standard fare in the area of terrain and world building, and I know some people will lose their shit when I say this, but some of it reminded me of Amazon's New World. Although I would note that in some areas I personally thought New World had slightly better visual clarity, when it wasn't blowing up people's graphics cards of course. On top of this you get all the wonders of standard fantasy genre design, but they clearly went batshit crazy on the weapons, armour and effects. I shit you not, I have literally stopped what I'm doing just to spend a few minutes admiring my new armour pieces, because I look so pretty. I'm not an artist, or a Souls fan, or a weeaboo, so I can't trace the influences back to art books or any other video game or comic book sources. But there are clear influences from other IP like Hieronymus Bosch. So beautiful? Yes. Original? Can't really say. Optimised on PC? Well, when my aneurysm has healed up, I'll check out some bench test results. But it is all put together very well, so as to create vast scenescapes, sometimes allowing you to see past and future areas from cliff tops, and the fact I stopped to take some beauty shots just of the views speaks volumes. And when I say vast, I mean it is one of the biggest open world maps ever. 79 square kilometres, bigger than GTA 5's entire map, and fairly densely populated. What's more, the design is quite well differentiated and distinct. It does not feel cookie cutter, and I'm frequently starting to recognise where I am from terrain features and the lay of the land. Elden Ring is impressive, imaginative and sometimes quite literally bonkers. In a good way. It is so far beyond the scope of tired, play-safe AAA normality that it was a breath of fresh air. Young girls talking about being grafted onto spiders, weird shit about grace. In fact, I didn't know what the fuck was going on most of the time. Well, apart from the arse kicking bit, but I just wanted to keep carrying on to see what was around the next corner. Frankly, I would have to say that the narrative of Elden Ring is more lost than Twin Peaks. What I mean by that is that Twin Peaks was fairly mind-bending in the detail, but behind the seemingly nonsensical and impenetrable aspects of the story, it actually all made sense if you had it explained to you. Whereas Lost was highly entertaining, seemingly very surreal, and full of mystery, but I'm pretty sure the writers didn't have a fucking clue what was really going on, and didn't even have a plan after the first season, so they just made it up as they went along. Both were entertaining, both seemed quite surreal, but only one was genuine. And I guess that is down to the writer-director David Lynch actually being a surrealist artist by trade. So yes, I loved the vibe. It was a refreshing, weird world, but I didn't struggle too hard to understand the lore too much because I ain't convinced that even the developer has finished making that shit up yet. I shit ye not, the meaning and details of the story are still apparently being hashed out and theory crafted by the developers now, after the game is released. This being said, with Elden Ring, my personal take was that the lore and the story were more set dressing for the action than there to serve as a central spine on which the journey hangs. But what do I know? Like I said, I never went to Hogwarts. The game's story was essentially co-written. The game's concepts and design are plucked straight from the game director Hidetaka Miyazaki's imagination, and the story and narrative appears to have been plucked straight out of George R.R. Martin's arse. Hidetaka Miyazaki is most famous for his production work on Armored Core, Last Raven, Deracine, that VR game about fairies, and apparently he might have made some Souls games. George R.R. Martin, as we all know, is most famous for fucking up Season 8 of Game of Thrones, and not finishing some books he promised to publish years ago. I don't want to cast any aspersions here, but let's be frank, I didn't read anywhere that Souls games are richly textured, narratively driven, heavily storied, dialogue-centric video games, and that is certainly corroborated by what I'm seeing here. It's action driven, and the primary momentum is provided by your desire to kill that next thing, beat that next boss, get through that next door and see what is on the other side, and all with lots and lots of loot whoring thrown in. As much as George R.R. Martin has written some fantastic books, I ain't never read them. I don't read books. Everyone knows books are for nonces and communists. I've watched the TV series, and I will attest that the dialogue and plot twists were masterful.
They killed a friend of mine.
You've got friends?
Not anymore.
But not having read the books, I can't comment on how much of this was him and how much of this was the TV series showrunner and the writers. I do know that Season 8 was such a pile of shit that I considered making a video about it, and I don't even make TV and movie reviews. So essentially I'm saying George R.R. Martin has done fine work in the past, but he is not a god, and he is certainly not past cranking out hack work when he's in a rush and the paycheck is good. If there is a real story here, it's best described as sparse, incidental, inferred, alluded to and largely left to the imagination of the player. Not that it matters much because you'll be too busy sheep worrying and polishing your new helmets to give a shit. Really, there is just so much to do, explore, kill and collect, and a ton of stuff to figure out. So personally, beyond the small dialogue exchanges, some of which were lovely, I was more focused on having my little chat and then dashing off to stab someone new in the head. Some of the game's deficits, however, are being shielded by conceit. The game is quirky, has very little hand-holding and is designed from the ground up to be a literal and figurative trial. The basic game design is beat your head against the brick wall and eventually, maybe, after many tries, the wall might actually break for once. Or figure out a way to get better and or better gear. But now combine this with a huge army of religiously devoted fanatics and then sprinkle on a fairly sizable packet of failed implementation and unfinished development. Now try and have a meaningful conversation about the broken or missing shit in this game, and all you will get is, "It's supposed to be hard." Well, that's how the game is supposed to be. The game doesn't tell you everything. What do you want? An easy mode? These kinds of arguments are being deployed to whitewash some fairly serious deficits in the game, certainly on PC. Deficits that appear to be the result of an entirely balked port to PC. In fact, possibly the worst port I have ever seen. And on top of that, it's clear to me, at least, that some basic shit didn't get finished by launch. Shit that was not a stylistic choice. Shit that was merely just shit. The game doesn't even have any obvious indication that exceeding a 70% equipment load will basically break your dodge ability, rendering it almost useless, ergo making the player think they are dying from using the wrong tactics rather than the wrong loadout. Now there is a tiny indication of this, and the numbers change colour, but there is no indication what those colours mean and why. You will obviously know what this all means if you've played previous Souls games, but frankly you would need to know what was going on and know what to look for to even pay sufficient attention to that detail early in the game. Now fanboys will no doubt already be typing away in the comment section along the lines of, the game doesn't tell you everything, you have to find it out for yourself. To which I would bitterly retort, horseshit. That's a conceit. The game does tell you about encumberment in the loading screen tips. So clearly this was a factoid that the developers deemed worthy of telling the player. It's just that poor little Ken-kun in the UI implementation department never got around to finishing the notification in the equipment screen. This sort of crap has to be filed under shit they didn't get round to finishing before launch. Random loading screen tips is not a sufficient way to inform the player of absolutely critical game mechanics. In fact, you could make the case that dodge rolling is the most critical single game mechanic in Elden Ring at the moment. I get it, the game is supposed to be hard, but that's not an excuse for all the game's failures and shortcomings. It is not optimised for PC. The port is barely modified from the console version. The graphics were simply not optimised for PC on launch day. It's auto capped at 60 FPS, but at launch the frame rate was yo-yoing up and down constantly. The UI is functionally not finished. When I launch the game, it tells me to press any button, but most of the buttons don't work. Seriously, why say press any key when it doesn't mean press any key? I mean, they tested this shit, right? This is on the opening screen of the game. Literally the first screen is broken on PC. What the actual fuck? I later discovered the only buttons that seem to work are your specific keybinds. This means it's literally porting over the limited button set from the console, and if your any key doesn't match a console button command, that won't work. Did they get this done in a larder factory? On PC, the user interface has all the ease and functionality of trying to program one of those old monitors that only has 4 buttons. You know the ones? Select back, up or down, and you have to navigate the tiresome menus by clicking select, down 7 menu items, click select, press up 4 times to increase contrast. It's 2022. Do better. At least add some hotkeys. Make the mouse work properly and fix the main menu screen. Seriously, it's a bit embarrassing people are defending this shit. If you love this game, well, good for you. I think it's superb too. But I hope people are not too fragile to accept the criticism that the enjoyment and frankly the functionality of the gameplay is sometimes compromised by this nonsense. I've fucked around for an hour working out how some gonk worked, finally managed to cash it in and equip it after much fuckery, and it did not increase my stats as promised. That's not good. All that effort for that stats boost and it just did nothing. I've died numerous times because I'm trying to cycle through my fucking equipment to find the right thing with my cursor keys whilst trying to keep my mouse view pointing the right way and not steering my horse because sadly a third fucking hand didn't burst out of my chest, grab the steering wheel and then give me a little tug job at the end of the fight. It took me a week to realise that I could left click on items in my bag and use them without equipping them first. I had no reason to know or assume that or try to see if it worked, because up until that point the mouse functionality had been shit. I fully appreciate that players on console have to put up with this kind of nonsense all the time, and my genuine sympathies go out to you. I'm terrible with a console controller, and that's precisely why I prefer to play on PC. But attacking people for criticising the console functionality that's been transposed onto PC and not having any hotkeys, well, that's just spite. That's console war rhetoric. And that console versus console versus PC bullshit is propagated by the AAA industry as a sales and marketing ploy and to generate tribalism within the console community. I'm sorry, console controllers are harder to use, but there's no reason to inflict that on PC players. Last time I checked, buttons were not being rationed in the West. If they had the presumption to sell this game on PC, they should have had the gumption to make it work optimally on PC. Although in its defence, the game won't let you sell equipped items of clothing, which is more than Dying Light managed to sort out. I will admit, I'm somewhat perplexed by the speech options. From what I can gather, the sophisticated AI heuristic programming of the character NPCs ultimately comes down to this: say yes, good. Say no, bad. In fact, I didn't spot any single speech check where agreeing was not only the default correct thing to do, but in fact discovered that saying no on the odd occasion will actually fuck up your playthrough. I also noticed one option where you could do something, but by doing it you choose the most ludicrous, pointless outcome possible that will cost you dearly later. I won't give details because spoilers. Honestly, the NPC interaction was diametrically opposed to a typical open world RPG. I'm assuming this is deliberate. It's not a dialogue driven game, and I'm just moderating people's expectations when I say most of the time the dialogue is basically along the lines of, "Hey mister, do you want this?" You say, "Yes." They say, "Cheers." You bugger off and kill more sheep. A key part of the progression is the dislocation of the quest progression from your personal character progression. It took me a long time and about 40 attempts on the first boss to figure this out, but I think it's actually excellent. Basically it means that you can do a fuck ton of levelling up, exploring and gearing up without ever touching the mid and late game content. If you're uber skilled, crack on and drive up the main quest line as fast as you can. But us mere peasants can quite happily hit the grind and level up our characters and then hit the same shit with better gear and eventually punch through the bosses. I think this is probably a core defining aspect of the general gameplay of Elden Ring. You can have fun and progress at any pace. I'm having a spectacular time pootling around, collecting my berries, picking up those bits of shit, killing those little kangaroo rabbit things, and doing drive-by killings on low-level mobs. I've got a new shiny pot metal helmet and a shield made out of a giant turtle shell. How cool is that? But meanwhile, players with slightly more drive and ambition than my good self are posting videos of getting to level 100 in 76-minute speedruns wearing nothing more than a crusty bra and some seriously soiled knickers. Let's just say that there is a degree of latitude in how you choose to play this game. It was much more forgiving than I was expecting. I know a geezer who played Dark Souls 3 and when he finally killed some boss he had been stuck on for days, his missus was going around telling everyone because it was apparently that much of a big deal. Souls games have a legendary reputation for difficulty and punishing gameplay, but Elden Ring is not quite that. Once you figure out how the game systems work, death can frequently just mean a reset of the NPCs and you have to scoot back and pick up your money from the ground. No harm, no foul. However, sometimes the stars will align to give you an optimal fisting and it will not be a pleasant outcome. At one point levelling up was costing 14,000 runes per level. Late at night, I'd been grinding for a while, was nearly on my way home with a purse full of cash and a porno tucked under my arm. Then I innocently pressed something and got transported against my will to a rather dangerous mine. Whilst there, I died a few times, but managed to get my money back on every occasion. Eventually, I cleared the place and noticed another little area. After a long, hard, laborious scrap, I cleared the whole place out and saw the exit. I scuttled over there, threw open the door, and it was actually a boss fight. A boss way out of my league. However, in order to get my money back, I would have had to start at the entrance to the mine, clear the whole fucking place out again, get to the boss, go inside, pick up my money, fight the boss again, no doubt die, and be stuck in an eternal loop of failure. I decided to sack it, cut my losses, and go home. At least I still had the loot in the bag, even if the money was gone. The very next morning I went out grinding again, got the 14k again, saw something interesting and got fucked by a bunch of nasty Minotaur guys. Rezzing up, starting to ride back to my cash pile on the floor, which was only about 50 feet in front of me, and I immediately got drilled in the eye by some mage or something who was up on a ledge above me, dying and losing my whole 14,000 Hogwarts dollars. Yet again, back to square one, twice inside the space of 12 hours. So yeah, generally this game is pretty forgiving, but when it's not, it royally takes the piss out of you. But you know, you'll be okay. People like games for different reasons. I enjoy story, exploration, progression, and frankly I like building stuff and creating stuff in game, whether that be buildings, gear sets or building sex palaces in Valheim. I've also been known for occasionally lying down in corridors in Call of Duty and camping with a light machine gun, but let's not go into that. Some people like beating things. Whilst there is general overlap in the things people like, Souls games are first and foremost about beating things. It's a test mechanic, it's a skill check, a learning check, it's a dedication check. It's about pitting yourself relentlessly against a problem until eventually you beat it, and then you move on to the next challenge. What you make of Elden Ring will to a certain degree be determined by the precise reasons why you play video games. Whether you personally like Elden Ring or not, it's an important game regardless. It is uncompromising in its game mechanics and design. It's not a mass appeal game, it's all about progress and the experience, and nothing to do with after sales. It's a game made to be a game with no fucks given, and it's been vastly more successful than most AAA bullshit games. It's important that From Software made a game like this, and that they are winning. I am personally very pleased that this game has been so successful, and I'm really glad that it has sent certain shockwaves through the industry, which possibly might result in some positive change. I think it's a good thing that people know what they're letting themselves in for with Elden Ring. If this is your first Souls game and you are a skillless fuck like me, you're going to be spending a lot of time early game, riding in circles, picking berries and stabbing sheep, to cobble together enough rune crypto just to pay for +1 endurance, so you can raise your HP by 1.3%. I shit you not. The grind is real and the learning curve is steep for the new guy. I'm talking spending many hours grinding spirit dollars to level up your strength to improve your weapon damage, and then you finally get that weapon you've been fantasizing about, only to discover that it scales with fucking dexterity. Dexterity at a point in the game where the next level will cost you thousands of cyber runes and your dexterity is piss weak, so it gets consigned to your storage chest. The game can be a trial of determination at times. Maybe it was my time playing Kingdom Come Deliverance, because that is an unforgiving game where you have to learn the game systems and will find a way to circumvent the ones you're weak at, but I was honestly surprised that I managed to master the remedial aspects of this game and start to progress. So personally, I'm prepared to put up with some slightly annoying gameplay features, a few arsehole fanboys squeaking "get good" like it's glistening pearls of wisdom offered forth from the font of knowledge, and tolerate the regular arse kickings, because the payoff is absolutely worth it. It frankly dawned on me that I'll be playing this game for hundreds more hours during the course of this year, and for 50 quid, that is a good deal. Elden Ring is not perfect, and it's certainly not a 10 out of 10 game. It's got a worse interface than a 1980s era personal computer, and you need to go on the internet if you want to understand how the weapon scaling works. But I will reluctantly admit that it is an excellent game. It required me to endure a lot of suffering to come to that conclusion, and I hope you think it was worth it. Because I do. A point came where the suffering became interest, and then a slight obsession. If you play Elden Ring and enjoy it, start to get interested in the builds, the exploring, killing things and farming all the crazy gear, weapons and armour sets, and playing Dress Up Barbie, then frankly you haven't just bought a game, you've bought a new pastime. As a new player, I'm 100 hours in and I've barely scratched the surface of this game. It's Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption 2, Kingdom Come Deliverance levels of open world obsession for you to explore. And what's more, it's worth looking in every nook and cranny, because frequently there is at least something to find around every corner and in the most obscure spots on the map. Elden Ring is much more game than we are used to these days, and with great sadness and with a heavy heart, I am reluctantly going to say that I strongly recommend this game to anyone, and if you do initially find it unpleasant, grating, obscure, vague, and crushingly punishing, my best advice is to knuckle down and keep playing until you make some headway, because if you start to enjoy this game, then you just paid 50 quid for potentially hundreds of hours of quality, fascinating gameplay. I went into this assuming that I would hate it. At one point I was worried that I would end up having to review it without managing to kill a single boss. Yeah, think about that conundrum. But despite my best efforts to hate on this game, which were significantly bolstered by my diametrically opposed level of video game skill, I warmed to my first experience of a Souls game. I feel slightly dirty for even saying that, because I pride myself on my cheesing running away and not being good at video game skills. But Elden Ring actually encouraged me to get slightly better at a game and learn the rules. It did not force me, it did not make me, it did not penalise me, it just basically laid out a plan with two main factors: skill and progression. If you have high skill, crack on. If you don't have high skill, progress, level up a bit, until that carries you. I like this game. I will continue to play it long after this video is made. And the scary thing is that I'm actually enjoying the experience. Fuck, I must be sick in the head. But for now, good luck and happy hunting.